On and go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. A lot of fair few things has happened. So if you follow the cricket, um, really interesting what's happening in the cricket with the Australian captain Tim Paine standing down over a texting scandal where he was texting a female member of staff. Obviously, with the ongoing racism scandal within the England setup, with Yorkshire and other things. Right. Okay. So Tim Paine, Cricket Australia should have handled the investigation into sexually explicit texts sent by Tim Paine to a female colleague differently. And this goes back to 2017. So the Cricket Australia. Oh my God. So basically, the Ashes looks like it's going to be overshadowed by scandal. It looks like so. Both England and Australia are going into this Ashes series on the back of scandal. Also, the Australian Open says unvaccinated players will not be allowed to compete at the Australian Open. That has just broken. Eddie Howe is to miss the first game as Newcastle boss, so Newcastle United, after having a positive COVID-19 test. And what's this one? Players becoming machines. PFA chief. Players are being viewed more like machines than human beings when it comes to the amount of games they're expected to play. That's the PFA chief, Mongalo. With league and cup games, many clubs can often have 3 games in a week. Reading Premier League champions Man City played 61 games in all competitions last season. So there's concerns about the amount of games players are playing. So managing, workload. There's it's just ridiculous. Obviously, England, South Africa. Yes. So, will the Ashes be consumed by off-field scandal? The England racism scandal and the Australia are now basically looking for another captain following scandal. It's not a good look. And what we need is just an Ashes series where the 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 players on the field determine the headlines. So we need to see an exciting Ashes series, which is really competitive, that goes down to the final test. It's closely fought, good quality cricket. And all we're having right now is a sporting crisis. And it's not just England and Australia. There's concerns about England and New Zealand withdrawing from touring Pakistan over terrorism threats, so security. Um, you know, this is a sport that lurches from one scandal to another. It seems the history of match fixing within the sport is a major concern, and it's just it's a sport that is in crisis and doesn't want to admit it's in crisis. Pretty much, it's just mistake after mistake the sport's making. It's harming itself, quite honestly. And where does the sport go from here? Because Cricket Australia and the ECB have faced a lot of criticism over the handling of several things that they've done over recent years, and they wonder why people are switching off the sport. They wonder why peak viewership of tournaments is lower than what it was 20 years ago. They wonder why, you know, the sport has so many issues. It's because of poor governance. And scandals like match fixing and the ball tampering and racism, and then with Tim Paine, a historical allegation that goes back to 2017, which was investigated in 2018, and then obviously with what happened with Steve Smith and Bancroft and Warner, he becomes Australia captain. He now loses the captaincy over this. Yet Cricket Australia put him in as captain following the ball tampering scandal. Yet they knew that there was this issue overhanging. How far back do I mean? This is just ridiculous. We should be going into the Ashes, and the Australians should be going into the Ashes full of hope that we're going to see some exciting play, that we're going to see some new players break through, that we're going to have a really exciting five-test series. Um, and all we're waiting for now is just any cricket will do over what we're getting in the news, because as a sport, it is, well, off the field, it's a mess. And then we've got this 100 format that no one wants. Like, you couldn't make this up. The sport is not in a good place. And I don't know where the sport what happens from here and where we go. Um, because it it's just that's just a mess, really. Um, Absolute mess. And it I mean, I could have done videos on it, and maybe I should have done videos on it, but what do you say? I mean, like it's getting to the point now where the sport is self-harming, and its ability for self-harm knows no bounds. It's like rugby league in the off season. I'm waiting for more players to misbehave badly in the NRL this off season, and Super League players to misbehave just to go. Well, rugby league seems to shoot itself in the foot on a regular basis. There are serious things wrong within the sport. There is a culture issue within the sport in various levels. The direction the sport's taking, um, it's clearly struggling to attract new fans and retain fans. Hence, why the 100 format is a thing. There's clearly issues within player development. Um, the culture within the sport. There's obviously a drink culture there as well, and that's been commented that the drink culture is negatively harming and impacting players. There's issues within the governance of the game from top to bottom. Cricket Australia knew about the allegations against Tim Payne before they made him captain in the aftermath of the ball tampering scandal. They knew that there were allegations against his character in regards to the sexually inappropriate content he sent a female colleague in the Tasmanian Cricket Board back in 2017. He was investigated and allegedly exonerated in 2018. And then 3 years later, he's having to resign as captain um, under the cloud of this historic event, this old incident that apparently he was exonerated. Now it turns out there was more to it than back in 2017 and 2018 when it was being investigated. So Australia now have a leadership vacuum in their test side. England, I honestly believe the England dressing room is going to be so divided beyond belief. Um, with what's happening with Yorkshire and Essex, and even a player at Somerset has now been dragged into the ongoing culture within the sport in England. So it's a mess. It's an absolute mess. And there's a reason why I don't do a lot of cricket videos on the channel. It's a sport I've fallen out of love with in recent years. And the amount of negative headlines that are being churned out by cricket at the moment, it doesn't matter if it's England, Australia. There was a New Zealand player who was involved in a match fixing scandal, who was in court. We've had Indian players, Pakistani players, um, the Sri Lankan cricket board after the ball tampering scandal as well. Cricket is a sport that is in a complete and utter mess. And what we should be looking forward to is the Ashes, a five-test series, the one-day series, a real thrilling tour with the best cricket possible, the best players on the planet playing against each other. And all we've got is a lot of negative headlines and a lot of scandal overshadowing what should be a great sporting event this winter for the Northern Hemisphere, this Christmas. And what we have is an absolute shower of shit, which the players can't behave. That is fact. Players can't behave. There's clearly a mass drink culture within the sport, which has been highlighted. There is a negative. I mean, the Australian win at all cost culture cost them badly with the ball tampering against South Africa, um, and has damaged their reputation. Which I think they're still some of those three players are still rebuilding now. I think Bancroft was the fall guy. Steve Smith and Warner. God, I don't. Does anyone want to play with him? Um, so the image of Australian cricket has been, harmed by the ball tampering scandal. This is another thing on top. At a time when the Australians should be going, well, the England team is in crisis, it's in disarray. We should go after them. They're not going to be at their best. Oh wait, we've got our own scandal to deal with. We haven't got a captain now. Great, cool. And this is a historical allegation, much like the racism scandal in English cricket, which we claimed we dealt with. So it was under the swept on the carpet because we needed Tim Payne as a wicket keeper. He's going to be our captain after the ball tampering. You couldn't make this stuff up. The guy who they replaced as captain, Steve Smith, got banned for ball tampering. So they put this guy in, and now he has to resign and stand down from the Test squad because of an incident 5, 6 years ago. You could not make this up. Which an incident that was apparently fully investigated by Cricket Australia, which shows the issues within Cricket Australia and its governance and the way it deals with complaints against players. You could not make this up. And cricket is shooting itself in the foot, much like football players, soccer players. If you're watching from North America, constantly, the image of football in the public domain is not a good image at times, with some of the antics that players get up to. And I could name a whole host of players who've had a lot of extracurricular activities that bring the game into disrepute. And I'd rather not. Rugby league players, it seems every off-season, especially in the NRL, there's always a handful who are getting themselves in trouble for alcohol-related incidents or drink driving or assault or, steroids or whatever it may be, recreational drug use. And the NRL was always on the reactionary going, oh, we're going to have to suspend and fine these players, da 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 da. The game's been brought into disrepute. Rugby union, we've had a fair few scandals in rugby union. And again, there seems to be a big drink culture there. Go across the North Atlantic into North America, the NFL, there's just scandals all the time. It's just become so commonplace that we've become numb to it, and it doesn't really make big breaking news anymore. You've got the NHL with the Chicago Blackhawks situation. While that's gone quiet on the news front, I think that has done huge reputational damage, not just to that organisation, but a whole lot of people who were at the organisation at the time. People have lost their jobs over it. The NHLPA has come under a lot of criticism for its handling of the situation, much like the ECB in the England situation with the cricket, where the complaints had reached the ECB level and not a lot was really done. So they were aware of what was going on, decided to do nothing about it. US gymnastics, Simone Biles basically, she shouldn't have been at the Olympics, not because she's not talented enough, but she's a broken individual mentally and physically. The well-being of athletes. We talk about the mental well-being of athletes, the link, the abuse they face on social media, and how the social media companies aren't doing enough to protect them. Quite frankly, it's laughable. And I, for one, I have a lot of sympathy for them, but at the same time, some of the antics of players, you put yourself in that position, you're gonna get a fair bit of backlash. But it's a difficult one, obviously, that kind of balance. But there's so much. Sport should be a unifier, not a divider, and unfortunately, it's not where it should be. The whole situation in regards to sport. This has been like a period of time where sports scandal. It seems once a month a sport is embroiled in scandal, and when sports are trying to compete for new fans, get kids involved in sport, families going to games, this is putting off parents going, I want my kid to play that sport, or I want my kid to watch that sport, or I want to watch that sport as a fan. I'll take my money elsewhere. And that is true. Some sports are really struggling to get that next generation of talent. playing and watching. Um, and yeah, the CTE lawsuit that the NHL and the NFL and now rugby league and rugby union are facing. It's going to cost these contact sport concussion's going to happen. It's how you look after an injured player and the protocols you have in place. Because you're not going to get rid of head contact in these sports. There's going to be high tackles. There's going to be headshots. It's going to happen. But at least look after the players when they're injured, and at least look after the players properly when they retire, and make sure they get the right medical care, because that's something that these sports have not been doing for a very long time. The head of the PFA is basically saying the players are being overplayed. And what we saw with Christian Eriksen in the summer at the Euros and other players and Sergio Aguero for Barcelona, I think there's a point to that. Man City played 61 games last season in all competitions in the regular season. That is ridiculous. There was a young Barcelona player who played 60 odd club games and then went on to play at the Euros, and I think played 66 games in a season, and he's 18 years old. That is a lot of strain to put upon the body. And our football was not as physical as rugby union and rugby league, and there are rules in place to try and limit the amount of games a player can play in a calendar year, because player welfare and trying to protect them from injury. But even so, to play 60 plus games for a football player, that's 90 minutes. Imagine if you played every single game, you didn't miss a minute, and you are like the Iron Man streak. Your body is going to be wrecked. You're going to be playing through injury. You are going to be playing with niggles that should need rest and recuperation. That later down the line, when you're in, like, let's say you're in your 20s, when you're in your late 30s, you might be in a lot of pain. And then people wonder why some players, their careers are ultimately very, very short. So player welfare is a massive concern. And, you know, while athletes now are much fitter and healthier than what they were 20, 30 years ago, and there is no doubt on the fitness, that is a lot of strain to physically put upon your body. And then we look at when sports stars are dying younger than the average population. There is a cause and effect. So when I do videos on player welfare, they don't get a lot of views. It's like fans don't care. They expect these players to constantly play. It is ridiculous to expect them to do so. But when I do videos, and I've done videos in the past on player welfare, be it mental or physical health, they don't get the views that I think they should have, and we don't get the discussion that we should. And that for me is just not good enough. Like, how many more players are we going to see retire, especially in the team sports, let's say in their 20s rather than their 30s? How many more are going to retire early because of injury or because of just their bodies just breaking down? It's going to go up. It surely will go up. There is no way that is sustainable for professional football. No way. Absolutely no way is that sustainable for professional football players. 60 plus games a season. That's before internationals. Those Man City players, imagine if I don't think any Man City player played every single game, but imagine if a Man City player played every single game and then goes straight into the Euros or the Copa America, and then plays every single game there, gets to the final. That's like 70, 75 games a season. That is ridiculous. That is absolutely ridiculous. What? And fans are like expecting the superstars to play all the time. It's not the case. Even the most skilled, physically fit player, like a Messi or a Ronaldo or a Neymar. Well, Neymar hasn't even played half the games he's eligible to play for. But just imagine, what that's going to do to their physical well-being when they're in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. It's not sustainable physically. There is no way that is sustainable physically. Not in a million years is that long-term sustainable physically. And people wonder why Christian Eriksen collapsed on the field. It's because players are actually being pushed too far. There's a limit to your physical endurance that a person can take. And the human body can take a lot, but there is a limit to physical endurance. There is a threshold where you go, my body is redlining right now. And other sports have now put rules in place to limit the amount of games players can play. Now, rugby union seems to be leading the way in a lot of things. It gets things wrong, but it's leading the way in a lot of things when it comes to player welfare. Um, how that changes how the game is played, we'll wait and see. Rugby league, um, the way rugby league works, there's less internationals, roughly the same amount of games played, but the way the game is played is slightly different. Um, so, eh. Ice hockey, I mean, there are some Iron Man streaks in the NHL that are absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous, in my opinion, for consecutive games played. And hats off to them. Honestly, hats off to NHL and ice hockey players in general. Absolute athletes. They are absolute athletes, in my opinion. And a lot of ex ice hockey players are dying young. They're dying in their 40s, 50s, and 60s when the average population is into their 80s and 90s. There's got to be a cause and effect. It was ultimately a cause and effect in that case. You know, and it 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 amazes me that in the 21st century, with all the data we have, analytical data and the scientific data that goes into modern coaching, that players have been pushed as far as they are, and there's got to come a breaking point where in a rugby union or an ice hockey or a rugby league or a football match or an NFL match, a player actually dies on the field. And it has happened before, but it's going to happen in a big game on a live broadcast in front of millions of people. And we were close with Christian Eriksen. We were very, very close with Christian Eriksen at the Euros in the summer. How far do we push athletes? And modern managers now, modern coaches now do have the squad rotation. And they get criticised for rotating their squads and trying to protect and manage their players' workloads. I think unfairly. I think that is a very pragmatic way to balance out the workload for your athletes. And coaches get battered in the media for the squad rotation policy that they have. They have no choice now. If you're playing 60, 70 games a season in a sport like football where you are on the field for 90 minutes as an average, let's say if you're on an Ironman streak and you play every minute of every single game, it's I in rugby union, if you've got an Ironman streak where you play 80 minutes regularly and you're a forward, your body is going to be broken by the time you're 35. And I did my career video yesterday or the day before on Muzzy, is it? And how his career was 13 years as a professional, but seemed he retired younger than a lot of players. In his last two seasons, he barely played for Birmingham City, and his career numbers are not as high as the amount of games played for, let's say, Messi or Ronaldo. But he was playing at a time when pitches were heavier, there were less, the playing surfaces weren't as good. Um, the game was more physical, uh, and yeah, his career was surprisingly for games played a lot shorter than people expect. And you know, I should do more career videos like that, and you'll see players getting hampered by injury and missing games. I mean, if I was to work out how many games Johnny Wilkinson missed as a rugby union player, if imagine if he stayed fully fit and didn't need the surgeries he needed after the 2003 World Cup, he could have had 150 caps. Same with Dan Carter. Same with Johnny Ronan O'Gara. They could have had more appearances. And Ronan O'Gara, out of the three fly halves, had the least injuries. Just imagine if they stay fully fit. What's the biggest mess of a soccer pitch I've ever seen during a game? Oh God, are we talking about live football here? I've been to a fair few matches since I was 7 years old. I've been to a lot of games. I think Ooh, the worst pitch would possibly be Fratton Park, Portsmouth against who were they playing? Ipswich in 2002. Because Portsmouth is right on the south coast, you get sea fog. The way that part of the south coast, there's a lot of islands, there's a lot of channels. Sea fog rolled in. The car park wasn't really a car park; it was a muddy field. The pitch itself wasn't the worst pitch I've seen, and I will admit that, but it wasn't great. On the TV, there's been a few FA Cup matches with the lower league side. There's been a lot of heavy rain, and the pitch is quite heavy, cut up. Um, that's a difficult question. That's a very interesting question. I think we've got so used to modern pitches now being like these green carpets of playing surfaces that aren't very muddy in the last 15, 20 years. We forget that years ago they would chop up. I mean, Old Trafford, Anfield, they all looked very knackered. But now we've got these hybrid pitches or these more genetically modified turf pitches where they've got a certain better drainage, undersoil heating. I would say the World Cup '98 playoff between Russia and Italy in Moscow was back in 1997 was a terrible pitch, and it was in a blizzard as well. It was in like -10 that they were playing. I watched it on the TV. That was a brutal game. The pitch was terrible, um, and that was 24 years ago. I remember watching that match to qualify for World Cup '98. That pitch was absolutely horrible pitch. I've seen some bad rugby pitches as well in both league and union in over the years. The 2013 World Cup, if you can find it on YouTube, Workington Town, Scotland, New Zealand. That pitch you can't even see the white lines anymore. That's rugby league, not rugby union. There's a difference. Rugby league is 13 aside. Rugby union is 15 aside. Uh, Scotland, New Zealand, at Workington Town. So it's a small stadium in the north of England. The pitch was absolutely dire. It had no drainage, heavy rain, and it was a mud bath. And that's in the modern era. In an international, that was a terrible pitch. The playing surface at Murrayfield until very recently was a poor pitch for tier one nation statuses. So rugby union, the top nations, that was a very poor playing surface. Cut up really badly. Wasn't great for the running game. So it was more keeping the game tight, like very physical, tight game. That was a very, very poor pitch, if I seem to remember. But there's been some bad pitches, normally in the lower leagues, but some former Premier League grounds and pitches were bad back in the day. The old Dell, which is Southampton's old stadium, used to have a very bobbly pitch. Oldham Athletic, at Boundary Park, wasn't a great pitch back in the day. The old Elm Park at Reading, which has now been replaced by the Medeski, that was famed to be an absolute mud bath and struggled, and the groundskeepers tried their best. Wigan Athletics pitch, because it's shared by rugby league and football, regularly got tired, and tired is a way to describe it. It would cut up, it would be muddier, it wouldn't be the best smooth playing surface. But in more modern times, pitches have massively improved, and even the lower league clubs now have really good playing surfaces and playing facilities that they didn't always have. It wasn't always the case. And so modern fans or younger fans don't realise, if they look back at the 70s, 80s, and 90s, some of the pitches were you could barely see the lines. They were cut up. They were mud baths. League, rugby union, football, even NFL. Back in the day, the pitches would tear up really, really badly. I would say, yeah, drainage has improved massively. Groundskeeping has improved massively in the last 20 years. We've got these hybrid pitches now. We have better drainage, undersoil heating, more investment put into the playing surface with the amount of money in the game. But I've seen some really horrific playing surfaces over my time. But it's hard to go, oh, the worst pitch of all time. I've seen some pretty bad ones. Um, Bearing in mind, I've been watching like live sport since I was 3 years old in 1992. Like 3 years old, I've been watching professional sport. So you know, I've seen the transformation of playing surfaces. Do modern sports games help market the sport, or does giving fans a full sense of what the game is like? It's more harm than good in the long run. Um, that is a very interesting question. Um, Very, very interesting question. I think you've really hit the nail on the head there. That's a very difficult question to answer. I think there is a bit of a false narrative with some sports. Where the playing surfaces are too good. We're seeing this debate now in professional football, what you call soccer, with the PFA uh, chairman saying players are being overplayed. They're becoming machines. They're not treated like human beings. And I was discussing this, like when you're playing. If there's imagine you're a player and you play every minute of your team's season, you don't get subbed off, you don't get injured, and you're playing 40. I think your average Premier League side, they play a couple rounds of the League Cup, they probably get knocked out in the third round of the FA Cup. They might get to the fourth round because that's when they join the FA Cup run. They won't, only a handful play in Europe. So you're looking at a 40, 45 game season, plus internationals, maybe 50 games, 55. When you're at the top end and you're competing like Man City or Liverpool for every trophy that's going, you're playing 60, 65 games in the season. Then those players have got to go to international squads when there's tournaments and qualifiers. Some players will be playing nearly 80 games a season, about 70, 80 games a season. Yeah, there has to become a point where, hang on a second, player welfare. I mean, come on. There's Iron Man streaks. And we know in every single sport there's a player who's played consecutive matches dating back. Like in the NHL, some players have got, I think the longest Iron Man streak is Phil Kessel or something, and he's played over 500 something games. Keith Yandel played over like 500 odd games as an Iron Man streak. That is ridiculous. That's including playoffs. That's like not missing a single game or a single shift and not being injured and not being suspended. That is absolutely ridiculous. So it just proves how physically fit these guys are. Um, there's I think it does give a little bit of a false sense of how brutal, some sports are, physically brutal upon players, and there has to come a point where we as fans have to go. We have to accept squad rotation. We have to accept that a superstar player needs a rest, or that Iron Man player needs a rest. Where they obviously want to play every game, and managing the workload. Yeah, modern fans, I don't think quite realise what sport was like in the 80s and 90s with the playing surfaces and the facilities, and how I think we're overcoaching players now. I think, and you know, in that regard, yeah, overcoaching players, um, pushing them, I think, too far physically. There's got to be a point where we go, okay, enough's enough. Certain sports are getting quicker and younger, um, and a lot of people, a lot of players are like, I'm retiring earlier. Um, we 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 got to look at player wages. They're massively overinflated for a lot of sports, um, and fan salaries. So us watching are finding it more and more expensive to go and watch games, and a lot of fans have said, "I'll just stay at home." Um, and then you got to look at the off-field incidents when, like, a sport's trying to market itself, and then the players misbehave, or there's an incident off the field or a scandal, and then families are like, I don't want my kid playing that sport. I'm not going to watch that sport anymore. I'm no longer going to support that particular team or that sport. I'm going to take my money elsewhere, and that is a fair discussion to have, especially with what's happening with cricket right now, with the constant scandals that sport is facing. Um, the NHL with the Chicago Blackhawks scandal. That has done massive reputational damage, not only to the Chicago Blackhawks organization, but to the wider sport as a whole. And the reputational damage and what that does when you're trying to attract new fans and you're trying to grow the sport and you're trying to get new investment and you're trying to get more kids playing the game, grow the women's game. When you see these negatives and they try and avoid dealing with the problem, which is what the NHL did. It's what the ECB did in the England cricket scandal that we're facing now with racism. Is what Cricket Australia did with Tim Payne and the sexting scandal that was well known about before he was made captain. It damages the reputation of the sport when you're trying to grow the sport to new fans and get more kids involved. Parents are going to go, I don't want my kid playing that sport because this is the culture that the sport has at the top level, which is negative, which doesn't deal with problems that the sport is facing, doesn't own up to the issues that the sport has. Um, but what you ask, your question encompasses a lot of topics to do with sport. Do I prefer watching sport at the lower levels. It's far more, fun to watch because the players are playing for the love of the game. They're not in it for the money. If they were in it for the money, they're in the wrong job. Because it's so hard to make the top tier level professional. Um, so when you're a lower level professional or you're playing part time, you're playing for the love of the sport. And we're losing that a little bit. The amount of youth players or academy players or those players that don't quite make it at the professional level and are cast offs. What do? When they've spent their entire, you know, teenage years prepping themselves to be a top flight professional athlete. That one injury, for example, can do them in, or there's just not a roster spot for them. And there may be money issues within a sport, so they have to give it up. What do? They've got no transferable skills. We've seen this with Olympians when they retire from Olympic competition, and they want to get into the modern, into they've had to retire for whatever reason, and they want to, continue earning money and make a living. They don't know what to do. They're not mentally prepared for the real world, as I call it, which is unfair on them because they are human beings, but their profession, they've had to retire young for whatever reason. What do they do as a career after that? If they don't want to stay involved in the sport, what do? So mental health, mental well-being, post-retirement, are they given the right direction to go into the workplace? And I watched an Australian documentary about ex professional athletes who've retired and what they do as their next steps, and it showed how expendable they are as a commodity, how the professional sports use them as a commodity. That's their selling point. These are professionals. We can sell their product. And as soon as they retire, they're no good to the sport. And they're not given the post professional sporting support they should be by the sports that they played in. They are just left to their own devices. They're not given, training courses. If they are, they're not really supported in those training courses. And they're just left without the skills to get by in the modern workplace. And in the real world, as I call it. Um, if I could combine two football players, one modern and one from the past, who would you combine to make the ultimate player? Ooh, that is a very interesting one. The ultimate player. That's an interesting one. I'm going to go for a player who did win the World Cup, who did play at multiple World Cups for Brazil, but it isn't Pele, and that's Rivellino. And I would combine him with a modern player. I would possibly combine him with. Oh, that's a difficult one. Rivellino from the 70s and 80s. I would combine Rivellino with. You're putting me on the spot here. I don't like this. I would combine Rivellino. Who would I combine him with? Because that's a very difficult question. Very difficult question. I would combine him with Ika Munyain, who plays for Bilbao. You wouldn't know who Ika Munyain is because he has played for Spain. He has played in the Europa League final for Atletico Bilbao. And Rivellino was a Brazilian who was part of the 1970 World Cup winning side and later became national captain, and played in Pele's number 10 shirt towards the end of his career. He scored the winning goal in the semi-final against Uruguay in 1970 and was a mainstay of the Brazil side of the 70s. I would combine him with Ika Munyain, and I think you have the ultimate attacking midfielder. Wouldn't necessarily score the most goals, but would create a lot of space for other players, such as your star players or like your strikers. But the pace and two-footedness in midfield and the driving runs, I think, would cause a lot of headaches for defenders. If we're talking about a former player and a modern player in the goalkeeping position, it's got to be Dino Zoff as the goalkeeper from the past. The goalkeeper of the present, Donnarumma, the Italian national goalkeeper right now. If you combine Dino Zoff with Donnarumma, you've got a dominant goalkeeper. I know Buffon's still playing, and Buffon is the modern Dino Zoff for his longevity, but they're the two goalkeepers I would combine. If we're talking about centre forwards, that's a difficult one. The late great Paolo Rossi for being a sniper in the box, or a Gerd Muller with modern player. I don't think. Mm, I don't think I'll have to look these guys up. Interesting picks. Appreciate it. Well, it's a difficult one because it's subjective, and the game has evolved from when these guys were playing in the 70s and 80s till now. And Dino Zoff was playing from the 60s. He first made an appearance for Italy, I think, in 1968, and played until 1982 for the national side. He played for like 3 decades, did Dino Zoff. He played till his 40s, and he was a dominant goalkeeper at Juventus in Italy, and then no other goalkeeper could really get a cap. Um, I could say Peter Shilton as well for the English equivalent. It's a difficult one because the sport evolves, and when you're talking about the greatest of all time, Pele has got the most goals and most appearances at club level, international level, well over Ronaldo and Messi. But his era is different, and the quality of opposition would be different. The playing surfaces would be different. The fact he never played a professional game in Europe is different. Um, and and the way the game has improved in fitness, the speed of the game, the change in tactics, the change in footballing style, improved defences, improved facilities, improved training, um, players being more professional off the field. A lot of the players I mentioned like to drink and to chain smoke. I mean, if I could say like the two of the best midfielders ever, like Cruyff and Socrates. I mean, Christ, they were chain smoking alcoholics. Um, both are no longer with us. Both are very, very dead. Socrates drank himself to death, and Cruyff smoked himself to death. So the change in you know um, in the dressing room, you look at it. I mean, if you want the best defensive midfielder who could also attack, Beckenbauer. Um, you couldn't have a better deep line midfielder slash defensive sweeper than Beckenbauer. Um, the Kaiser, as he's known. And then you look at um, like Jeff Hurst as a wing centre forward. Had a purple patch in the late 60s, early 70s. Jimmy Greaves, best goal to game ratio for England. You've got players of the 90s like Leonardo in midfield and Dunga, and a changing culture for the Brazil side. You had Crespo and Batistuta for Argentina. Diego Simeone, you don't get midfielders like that anymore. Would he make it in the modern game? He'll probably be suspended half the time. Modern players, because I think the quality of what we're seeing is lesser now than I think at its peak between the mid 90s and the mid 2000s. That's when I believe football was at its best. I think we've got too many droid players now who literally are just physical specimens rather than actually football players. They could play rugby league or rugby union or NFL. They're built like, the fitness and the physicality is different. I think players are overcoached now. There's less flair in the game. The game has become so rigid in coaching. We need to roll it back a little bit, and allow creative players to create and play what's in front of them and play with flair, because what I'm seeing is Brazil now is not the Brazil of the 70s and 80s where it was just pure flair and attack, and defense was a secondary. South American football is changed massively. Um, European football, we have the tiki taka, which antiseptic, as I call it, antiseptic football. And I don't like the Spanish way of playing without a centre forward, without a focal point up front. That I find really puzzling. It's not overly effective because they haven't won a tournament since 2012. And in tournaments, they crash out quite catastrophically, either in the group stage or in the first knockout round. And when they crash out, it's hilarious because they're busy pointing fingers at each other and falling apart mentally. So Spain's gone back to type. But no, it's an interesting one. I think looking back on past players, it's difficult because the playing surfaces are so much better, the fitness is so much better, the coaching I think has gone too far. I think we're now overcoaching players. The quality of leagues is so much better. The defences are far better organised. Goalkeepers, even at lower levels, are far better. And overall, I think the game has become so professional that we're overcoaching players. I think we need a little bit more of that old school style. Tackling's going out of the game. The rise of players diving is really frustrating. I mean, I would say to you, look back at the 1974 World Cup semi-final between Holland and Brazil, one of the nastiest games ever played. The World Cup semi-final of '82 between France and West Germany, because obviously before reunification you had East and West, and the '82 final between Italy and West Germany. Those three games were three of the dirtiest games ever played. Then you've got the 2010 final between Spain and Holland, which was one of the nastiest games ever played. And the referee lost control of that game very early on. It's very rare you get games like that now. And then compare other sports as well. Like rugby union, rugby league. Again, players now are just one-dimensional in the sense of physicality. They're all one-dimensional. You don't really get a small fly half anymore. You don't really get a small scrum half anymore. Some of these guys are even scrum and fly half are 6'2", 6'3", and they are big units. 15 years ago, the scrum half might be 5'6" in rugby union. Rugby league, some of the halfbacks, the 6 and 7, some of them are actually quite sizable units. Whereas back in the day, your skill players would be more slight of foot and smaller, and they'll be defensively weaker. You don't have that anymore. The outside backs now are massive. Do international breaks need to be reformatted? Yes. Just yes. The way I would do it is move the qualifying tournaments to the off season. You get rid of international friendlies, and therefore you don't disrupt the league seasons as much. The Nations League, I'm not sold on that. Move your qualification group stage, the qualification groups to the summer. Play them as like a mini tournament, and then you have that. It gives those players good tournament experience for when they go to the World Cup, to the Euros, to the Copa America, to the Africa Cup of Nations, the Gold Cup, things like that. I would play the qualification tournaments much like the Euros and the World Cup, for example, in the off season in the summer. Um, you get rid of international friendlies altogether. Um, and the Nations League, yeah, I'm not sold on it. Some fans are, some fans aren't. It does mean there are competitive internationals, but we've seen these like Nations League type tournaments back in the 70s with the four nations, like the home nations playing tournaments in the 70s, which was great. Um, so England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland would play like a little home nations tournament in the 70s, and Scotland were the best side at the time. They were great little tournaments historically. So we've seen that kind of regional format before. But that's how I would reformat it. You get rid of the international breaks mid-season, and you put all the internationals in the summer for the qualifiers, tournaments, the whole lot. Um, but it doesn't work that way. Football fans get built up, or soccer fans get built up for those international tournaments every 2 years. Um, and it's what's been agreed between the regional federations and FIFA. Um, you know, the club country debate. I don't know how North Americans feel about it. When you have, what how does the international game? How has it felt over in the US? Like, what's the opinion from fans in the US for it? Over and the MLS as well. That's obviously mostly played in the summer. Um, I don't think North American fans fully realise how frustrated we get as European fans with the constant international breaks. Yes, I know they've had to really congest qualifying for the World Cup, and they've had to slightly alter the international calendar because the World Cup in Qatar has been played at a weird time of year over the Christmas period. Um, uh, do I prefer club football or international football? That's an interesting question. I'm more likely to watch cup football than league football. I watch the FA Cup and I watch the internationals when they're on because it is different. You get to see players you wouldn't normally see if you're supporting your club. Um, I prefer like the FA Cup over league football. So yeah, that is a sort of a club thing. But the only chance I really get to watch is when the internationals or FA Cups are on. So FA Cup games are on. So I prefer international football more. I think the club game at club levels got so many issues. It's unreal. And if I was to break down all the various problems, then that's another thing. I don't get me wrong. I've been to a lot of games. I've been to Premier League and Championship games. When it was the old Division One, I've been to a lot of FA Cup games as well. I've been to a youth FA Cup game before. That is a different experience. Actually, I will admit I've been to a youth FA Cup game. Crowd's a lot smaller, mostly family and friends that go, and schools go because especially if you've got a footballing program at your school that feeds into the professional system or a sports program, especially at boarding school where I went. Um, you go. And I went to a youth cup game in 2001 at the Medeski when it was a reasonably new stadium all those years ago between Reading and Man United, and I saw some players playing then who did go on to have good professional careers. I'm not sure if any of them are still actively playing because that was 20 years ago. So I think a lot of those players, I think Luke Chadwick was captain of the Man United youth side that day. Reading youth side, I can't remember if he was captain, but I think a lot of those players are all now retired. 20 years ago. Ridiculous, isn't it? When it comes to rugby league, I prefer club rugby league over international. When it comes to rugby union, I prefer international rugby union over club rugby union. So it depends on the sport, the club country debate. Um, when it comes to football at the moment, unfortunately, I'm leaning towards international over club. Although when it comes to club football, I prefer the cup competitions over the league competitions. It's just how it sort of falls into place. That's again personal opinion. Obviously, everyone has their own opinion on um, you know football, rugby league, rugby union. Certain leagues seem to, and certain sports seem to do better at club level. Other sports seem to do better at international level. But I'll be interested to see what you guys feel about the club country debate because we have it in rugby union, we have it in football. and releasing players, for international duty, how that disrupts your squads when you're playing club games. Because in rugby union, you don't have international breaks apart from the World Cup. When the Six Nations is on and the autumn internationals, the club game continues. You just lose your best international players to the international setups, but your club game continues. So that's where the younger players get experience, and your fringe players, your squad players, slot in, or your veteran players you've retired from international rugby union get to slot in and have some game time. So squad rotation. Rugby league, there's just international breaks. They never ever play internationals during league. Rugby league is very similar to football. They have an international break. They'll have windows where they'll play test matches when things allow. Obviously, COVID's massively impacted rugby league. It's a far smaller international game. NHL hockey jersey. Mine's got to be the Kachina or the Screaming Eagle of the Washington Capitals. I have a Screaming Eagles Jaromir Jagr. That Washington Capitals jersey is a brilliant jersey. They should bring it back. That's my favourite all time. I don't. Some of the alternates, the Vancouver Canucks 2004 to 2006 alternate, I liked the red one. I was a big fan of. I'm a big fan of the Kachina. I like the Vegas Golden Knights jersey just because it's different. I'm not a big fan of some of the Jets jerseys. Not gonna lie. I do like some of the retro ones though, but I'm not a big fan of their current logo. I think it's a little bit safe. I like the original Senators jersey. My mate's got one of them. I like the Kings jersey from the mid 2000s before their current jersey. I think that's their best jersey they've ever had. The purpley blue one. But it's a difficult one. I don't really have a favourite. Out of my collection of just hockey jerseys, my favourite is the Screaming Eagle. Kachina, it's Kachina. There's a C in there. Don't worry, the Kachina is different. It's like the Mighty Ducks jerseys as well. I like them as well. I don't like the current Anaheim Ducks jerseys. I wish they kept the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim because it was a different way of looking at it. Anaheim Mighty Ducks would have been pretty good as well. The Kachina is just a cult. It's a cult thing. Even if you're not an Arizona or ever a Phoenix fan or an Arizona fan, it is the Tucson Roadrunners jersey as well is pretty good. I like the Roadrunners jersey in the AHL. It's a cult thing. It's what collectors want to buy. It's one of the most bought jerseys of the NHL, the current NHL jerseys, and the old classics, the old CCMs. It was one of the most purchased jerseys in the last 5-10 years. It is a collector's item. It's very, very popular within the fan base. There's a couple of football jerseys I want to get my hands on as well. I've got a couple of NFL jerseys. NFL, I'm not so keen on some of the NFL jerseys, but it's a different kind of marketing they have. But I do like the Kachina. I want to get my hands on one. I want to get my hands on a CCM because they're worth a lot of money and they're harder to get hold of. There's less of them. I did see the photograph circulate about Kickow with the Canterbury Bulldogs. He's meant to sign there from the 2023 season, and it wasn't meant to be released. It got released. Gus Gouldy, obviously, he used to work for the Penrith Panthers. He's come out and Gus Gould has made a public apology. They're investigating who released the footage, who released the images. It wasn't meant to be released at that time. Penrith aren't very happy. It's not the end of the world, but it doesn't look good when you're obviously wanting to defend your title. One of your key players is wearing rivals gear. He's still contracted for another year. It's the NRL off season. They're trying to make a story out of nothing. It's not the biggest. It's not the end of the world. It's not as if Philly Army Kickout has been done for drink driving or assault, like many players seem to get done every off season. It's not the biggest off season drama I've ever seen. It is what it is. It is cool that Shane Doan's son was drafted by Arizona. That is a big thing. Um, that is a massive thing. And if anyone says hockey isn't working in the desert, um, or doesn't shouldn't be there, that's a feel good story. If we don't have the Coyotes franchise in Arizona, we don't have Austin Matthews in the league. That is plain and simple. We do not have Austin Matthews playing for Maple Leafs. We don't have him getting drafted. We don't have Shane Doan's son getting drafted for Arizona. That's a feel good story for a franchise that hasn't had a lot of feel good stories. Um, and I do actually have some Arizona gear. Actually, I want the Kachina. I want the original Kachina. It's so hard to get hold of. Do you have $600? Do you have 575 English pounds? That's not including postage because I want one. But yes, it is cool that Shane. Jokes aside, it is cool that Shane Doan, part of the organisation, his son gets drafted. That's a big feel good story. Obviously, on a not so good feel good story, Liam Kirk, who is part of the organisation, has busted his knee. He's going to be out for 9 months. That's a massive shame. He had a good start to his AHL, you know, AHL career. He had a great World Championships. That's a big blow because I was hoping to see him in the NHL this season. Although he might get called up next season when he's fit. This time away may do him good, and reevaluate his position and where he can improve and his fitness. So it's not all doom and gloom. Injuries happen. Hopefully it's not completely derailed his hockey career, and hopefully Liam Kirk continues with the process and continues to develop and eventually makes it to the NHL and doesn't give up. But yeah, I did see the kick out picture. As I say, it's not the biggest thing. It's a non-story really. We know he's leaving the Panthers in 2023. There was concerns that the Dolphins were going to pick him up. Canterbury are obviously in the middle of a rebuild. They want to get as much talent as possible. Kickout's been based in the Sydney area for most of his career. It's a logical choice. He just goes up the road to Canterbury. It's not as if he's got to relocate to Queensland. Um, Penrith are going to be in salary cap hell, but they have a production line of talent, so they've got time to replace Kickout when it comes to 2023. It's a non-story, really. Um, as I say, it's not as if he's done something really egregious off the field. It's not as if he's been involved in any kind of issue that's, again, he hasn't broken any law. Canterbury are obviously a bit red faced because they obviously wanted to put that on their Twitter feed at a later date when it had been confirmed that he was 100% signing for them in 2023. Um, but it's a non-story. It's nothing. It's not as if he's done what other players have done in the off season and get up to some really negative antics by getting arrested, drunk and disorderly, drugs offences, drink driving, assault allegations. How important is Austin Matthews? Very important. If we don't have the Arizona Coyotes or what was Phoenix, you don't have Austin Matthews. He grew up watching Shane Doan. Um, the Quebec Nordiques, the Nordiques government are pushing to get the Quebec Nordiques back. They're having meetings with Gary Bettman soon, is what they're saying. Is that a sign that the Ottawa Senators might be moving? Because I can't see. There's been no. And with the current Arizona ownership saying that we're investing in Tempe, we're going to have an arena um, by 2023. We're investing in Arizona. We want to stay here. Carolina stabilizing. Florida now becoming a good team again. There is no appetite for the NHL to relocate any team. There's also no real appetite to expand past 32 teams. It makes no logical sense. It really doesn't. Because if you expand by 32, how far can you go before you really start affecting the conference's interconference play? Do fans want that? No. Um, Expanding the NHL, I think it's more to do with the AHL affiliates, relocating AHL affiliates to new locations. I think the NHL is maxed out for teams. I can't see there's any appetite for relocation. The league will make less money from relocation fees over expansion fees. This is a period of time where you need stability. The 70s, if the 70s and the 90s proved anything, that instability affects um, TV deals massively and reaching that broad US market. And the Canadian dollar does nothing for the Quebec Nordics. There's a reason why they didn't get the franchise in 2017, which went to Vegas, and they were part of the bidding process. They were one of the bids, and they finished third out of the three cities that put forward bids. They were the ones that came last and withdrew the first to withdraw. Um, Seattle getting the this year's franchise again. Quebec was put on the back burner. It was put on the back burner when it was announced that the Kraken were coming and it was going to Seattle. Um, I There's a reason why they left Quebec. It's not because of lack of fans, not at all. It quite literally is the Canadian dollar and the economics, and it is a very it's a smaller market in Canada than Saskatchewan for what you're going to get with TV viewership, commercial sponsorship, and yes, a fair proportion of the players are French Canadian who are Canadian players. Um, but I don't see it has to have 2/3 majority voting from the owners. There has to be 2/3 majority to vote in favour of further expansion or relocation. There is nothing coming out of the NHL league side of things that would suggest um, a push. San Francisco, you've got the San Jose Sharks who cover that market in the San Francisco area. Wisconsin, where and San Diego, they've had major league teams before, and they've relocated out of San Diego. So again, um, would would they work? Wisconsin, I don't think there's a big enough urban area in the state of Wisconsin to. While it is a hockey area, absolutely, and there's the NCAA, University of Wisconsin, all that. San Francisco is already covered by the San Jose Sharks. They cover the Bay Area, that catchment area. And you've also got the Barracuda there as well. Houston, yes, Houston were second in the expansion voting after Vegas. When Seattle came along, Houston also put in a bid as well, but Seattle were better funded, further ahead. Um, and right now, the only way Houston gets a team is if you relocate someone, and there is no appetite from the league to relocate anyone. They are happy with investing in Arizona. They're happy with staying with the Panthers in Florida. Carolina's sorted themselves out. At which point, the Islanders have got their new building, which is opening tonight. You've got the Ottawa Senators, I think, are the team in Canada in the weakest position when you're arguing for relocating a team. The Ottawa Senators, their attendance isn't great. Partly because the team isn't very good, partly because of ownership. Would Eugene Melnick be willing to sell? Quite possibly, but then you have to rejig the conferences again. But there is no appetite at this current time for any further expansion or relocation. And Houston's gone very, very quiet. Kansas City's gone very, very quiet. Quebec suddenly out of nowhere is having a talk with the NHL about what we don't know. Which it's assumed it's about relocation or expansion and getting a team in Quebec. In that case, you might get a minor league affiliate of one of the Canadian teams being put there. I cannot see the size of the Quebec market as Quebec City, not the province. Montreal just has an international fan base. Montreal, there are American fans south of the border. There are fans over here in Europe. Quebec, the Nordiques moved for financial reasons. Canadian dollar then, much like the Canadian dollar now, is not strong enough. The economics does not support having another team in Canada. While I would love to see an all Canadian division or an all 8 Canadian teams, which would be brilliant, you would have to completely redo the conferences and redo the divisions if you're doing it like that. On the Houston side of things, they've gone very, very quiet. Um, very, very quiet in regards. I think they fully accepted that expansion's done, relocation's highly unlikely, and the NHL is going to continue to support Arizona. Arizona's ownership is saying we're going to invest in the Phoenix metropolitan area in Tempe, which is a satellite city of Phoenix. They're willing to put a lot of money into that, into a new arena, and work with local council. Florida at Sunrise, their arena deal I mean, I watched the game. I watched the game against who were Florida playing? Who were they playing? Ah, I was watching Florida Panthers game in Indianapolis. Indianapolis, yes, is a good city. And the NFL Combine, for example, it's a city built to host major events. It really is. It's got a well developed arena district, as I call it, a conference center district. I do follow the Pat McAfee, show, and of course they're based in Indianapolis, and they talk about more than just the NFL on the Pat McAfee show. But again, does it have a hockey fan base? Is there fans there already? Is there's a reason why the NHL hasn't gone to Indianapolis? The locations they've tried before and refused to go back to again: Atlanta and Kansas City. They have tried in those locations before, and it has failed before. Three arenas I would like to visit: Madison Square Garden. Um, that's a definite. Staples Center in LA, just because it's on the other coast, so I've done coast to coast, and of course I'm a Winnipeg fan, so I want to go to the the I forget what they recalled it. It was the Bell MTMS, so now it's changed sponsorship, but the arena in Winnipeg. Simply because I'm a Jets fan, and I would like to see a Jets home game in the playoffs with the Winnipeg whiteout. Just something I want to do. I want to do all the 7 NHL arenas in Canada, but that's going to be very difficult logistically because every Canadian team would have to be playing at home at the time, which is not going to happen. I would like to go see the Saddle Dome before they replace it in Calgary. But Madison Square Garden is definitely on the to-do list. It's on a lot of people's to-do lists. And I've got a friend who's a Rangers fan, so it'd be nice to take him to the US as well, my mate Sam, because he would be salivating to go to Madison Square Garden. Um, but I also want to go to the Hockey Hall of Fame and the Hockey Museum in Toronto. So there's a few things I would like to do, um, but it's one of them. It's you know I'm not really sold on a lot of US arenas. They're not really on my stadium to do list. It's weird, that isn't it? I mean, my stadium to do list. I mean, I want to go to I want to go to see. I want to go to Suncorp in Brisbane. I want to go to the SCG, the MCG. I want to go to the Gabba, which is all in Australia. I obviously want to, do more stadiums in Europe, like the San Siro, the Stadio Olimpico. The Stadio Flaminio is shut at the moment, but I would like to go there. I want to go to the new Lansdowne Road, the Aviva Stadium in Dublin. I want to go to Croke Park in Dublin, Hampden, Murrayfield. There's a lot of stadiums that I want to go to in Europe. The Olympic Stadion in Berlin, the Westfalenstadion in Dortmund. There's a lot of stadiums I want to go to in the Sham Manesh in Bilbao, the new one. Obviously, the old one's been knocked down. There's a lot of stadiums that I want to go to in Europe, and more so than America. A lot more stadiums I want to go to in Australia, more so than America. I'm not really. A lot of the NHL, NBA arenas are all very similar, if that makes sense. I want to go to T-Mobile in Vegas. I do want to go. I want to go there, and I want to go to the Atlanta Dome, the Mercedes Dome in Atlanta. But overall, better promoter and legacy wise, well, Dana White and Vince McMahon are both assholes. Just gonna put it out there. Both their products are heavily flawed, and the negative press. Well, I suppose any press is good press. Vince McMahon right now is destroying WWE. I remember when it was WWF because I'm that old. World Wrestling Federation. I remember the Attitude Era with great fondness. But both their promotions, the amount of negative headlines that come out of those promotions, regardless that pro wrestling is pro wrestling and is not truly sport, but is not truly entertainment, it's sports entertainment. And UFC, while I've got friends who do MMA, I prefer Bellator. But Bellator is a bit quieter when it comes to promoting itself and seems to also have less controversy as well. Whereas UFC loves the controversy. It loves the fact that Conor McGregor and other fighters are always in the headlines because it puts spotlight on their product, for good or bad. Um, but I do think there's going to come a point where there's going to be one scandal too far for Dana White and UFC. There's going to be one scandal too far, and I'll be waiting for it because when it happens, um, I'm looking forward to when that scandal breaks. I genuinely am. I really shouldn't say that, but I think UFC. The only reason why it's become as popular as it has, or has got the attention it has, is all the outside the octagon scandal with Conor McGregor and other fighters as well who've had negative headlines. It puts a spotlight on that promotion. It puts a spotlight and media interest in the promotion for good or bad, and that creates interest, and then you can sell your product. Stone Cold Steve Austin. Uh, I'm more of a fan of The Rock because he was the best heel who became the babyface by accident. I prefer Dwayne Johnson. Don't get me wrong, I love Stone Cold. I love listening to his podcast as well. It's really funny because he's brutally honest. Um, Obviously, I'm an Eddie Guerrero fan, or I was. I lie, I cheat, I steal, Latino heat. I loved Eddie Guerrero. I was a big fan of his, and obviously, when he passed away, obviously, that's when my love of pro wrestling as a teenager started to wane massively, and then obviously I turned my attention to the TNA Impact, and then that got mismanaged shockingly. And we've ended up where we are, where I don't really watch pro wrestling anymore, which is a shame because I used to massively enjoy it, but it's lost its appeal for me. I've got friends who wrestle on the independent circuit here in the UK, and I have watched them wrestle. I've helped them set up the rings and the equipment. I tell you now, a wrestling ring is painful when you fall in it. Um, oh yeah, I got my collectible clipper, my titanium clipper, which came with its own case. Look, it comes with its own case. You can tell I'm adulting when I get excited about home appliances coming in like a collectible case. I mean, I got excited when I got my microwave and my kettle as housewarming gifts from my mum. Most intense match environment I've ever been in. I've been to a few. I've got to shut my face now. That's a difficult one. I would have to say most intense. Most intense atmosphere. I've got. Oh God, that is actually a very very difficult one. I have been to a lot of football stadiums, mostly as a neutral, but I would say Southampton versus Leeds United in 2003, 2004 season, where the 2003 season, the match that got Leeds United relegated. Pretty much, they were officially relegated the following weekend. This is when Leeds United crashed out of the Premier League the last time. And they were 3-0 down at half time. They pulled it back to 3-2, and then Southampton were guaranteed safety in the Premier League that season, and Leeds were not. And then the next weekend they lost another game, which confirmed their relegation from the Premier League. I think that was probably the most intense match I've been to. Was at St Mary's, and Leeds ended up getting relegated. Southampton got relegated the following season, so it didn't really benefit them much. But Leeds got relegated that season. That was, I think, the most intense match I've been to. I could also probably say Fulham Brentford at the old Griffin Park in the FA Cup. That was a very intense atmosphere because of the teams playing. A bit of a local derby. I would say going to Loftus Road was quite intense because you're very close to the pitch at Loftus Road, and Fulham were ground sharing with QPR at the time because Craven Cottage was being redeveloped and having a lot of building work done. I've been to Anfield, was quite intense. I've been to Twickenham a few times. That's always an interesting atmosphere, but for club rugby, it's different. But ice hockey is always a fun atmosphere because when it's gone quiet and you can hear that intensity because the crowd's gone quiet and you can hear the big collision. And I do miss the old Bracknell Ice Rink because you could fit about 3,500 people in there at full capacity if they had all the seating out. They reduced the capacity as the years went on, and it's now shut. But I remember there was a game against the Basingstoke Bison, and it's a local rivalry that is intense as hell. And it went down literally to 4 seconds left on the clock when the winning goal is scored, and the building started shaking. And when I say shaking, the building shook violently. And that was a game. There was a game against Sheffield where it was I think there was quite a thing. Um, okay, this is a. Well, I could say I saw Johnny Wilkinson lift his first piece of silverware in the Tetley Bitter Cup final on a very cold February day, which was basically the rugby union equivalent of the FA Cup at the time between Harlequins and Newcastle. And Harlequins are winning like 19-3 at half time, and Wilkinson kicks them to a 21-19 victory with the last kick of the game. Um, that was my second experience at a live sports match, and that was back in 1990. I still have the program somewhere. I still have the program. Um, you think the Premier League has been worse? Is better or worse if you compare the top four when Ronaldo was babyface? I think it's more competitive now, but a lesser quality now on the playing side of things than what it was at its peak in the 90s and the early 2000s. Personal opinion. I think the Arsenal's Invincibles and the treble-winning Man United team were far better than anything that we're seeing now. Oh, bloody fad keeps going up. Um, that's my personal opinion on the Premier League. I think it's more competitive, but it's a lower quality. I think footballing quality is. I think the quality of football now is less than what it was 15 years ago. Personal opinion. I think that football was at its peak between 1995, 96, and about 2008. That 12-year period was when football was at its best. I think it peaks then. Since then, we've had the South Africa World Cup, which wasn't great, wasn't the worst, and it's not as good as what it was. Personal opinion. I think just personal opinion. Everyone's different on that. I think I've seen better players than Ronaldo and Messi grace a football field. Let's just say that. But yeah, you could argue the dominance of Madrid and Barcelona, Real Madrid that is, and Barcelona in La Liga has sort of skewed with their power they have with UEFA and their following within the game that Ronaldo and Messi keep winning the Ballon d'Or because what reason? I think we're going to have a new Ballon d'Or winner this season. We're going to have new names on that trophy, and then we're going to see um, a different style of football. But that's personal opinion. Um, when you say witness history, I have seen Liam Kirk play in the flesh as well. He was a coach, and he wasn't a very good one. Maradona was not a very good footballing coach. I will always say this: great players don't tend to make great coaches. It's the average players who've been the squad guys, who played at the lower level, who know what it's like to grind away at the coalface, tend to make better coaches. Um, they're the coaches you find are the better coaches of those players who played at the lower level or haven't been the superstars, who've been the grinders, who've been the hard-working players, who've been the guys who've been on the coalface, knowing that they're not the best, but they're the best students of the game because they're either on the bench a lot or they were injured a lot, and so therefore when they're in the dressing room, they're listening to the coaches, they're learning from the coaches, they're watching the game, or they're studying. Um, they're studying things. They're the students of the game. Uh, Great players don't tend to make great coaches. Personal opinion. It's just a personal opinion on that one. But again, yeah, Maradona, brilliant player, terrible coach, absolutely woefully, just completely not coach material. Absolutely hopeless. He was national coach and he was a club coach, and he wasn't very good. He was appalling, quite frankly. One of the worst Argentina coaches of all time. Lucky to get them qualified to that World Cup where he coached them. I think it was in 2010. I think. They almost didn't qualify, which would have been an absolute joke if they didn't. But the talent they have on their disposal. But yeah, Maradona was not a great coach. There is no hiding. He was a great player. Obviously, with all the controversy surrounding Maradona as well, great player, but not a great coach whatsoever. Um, um, but again, personal opinion. But stats will back me up on that one. But yeah, so what's email? Some emails. Let's have a look at my emails quickly. Not a lot new on there. Great, cool. Yeah, Maradona. He wasn't a great coach. As a player, he had a massive ego and a lot of off-field dramas. Paul Gascoigne is another one. Gaza, superstar player, tried management at Kettering Town, lasted 36 days. Yeah, lasted 36 days, wasn't very good. But there are some interesting questions like, do I think the Premier League is better or worse now? I think it's more competitive now, but I think the footballing quality is less. Um, but the game keeps evolving. Sport goes through eras. When you try and compare an era before to an era now, it's subjective. I personally think football was at its best between the mid '90s and the mid to late 2000s. Um, that's my opinion on the quality that we've seen, the depth that we saw, how hard it was to actually get into Europe. But that's the thing. Well, back in when he was growing up, there was a lot of poverty in Argentina. There was a lot of political instability, and for a lot of South Americans, football was an escape from poverty, and still is. Um, still is. But he would play in the alleyways, in the slums. He got noticed by Boca. Signed very, very young. He became a superstar in the Argentinian league. Earned his move to Barcelona. Didn't work out at Barcelona. He ends up at Napoli. Um, Becomes a superstar at Napoli. That team transforms itself. A lot of his Argentinian teammates end up at Napoli, and then it all goes horribly wrong. As a player, he was a unique talent. There is no doubt on that. Didn't score as many goals as people realise. He scored less goals than people expect. His goal scoring ratio is a lot lower than Pele's, for example. It's actually lower than Messi and Ronaldo as well. His goal scoring, goals to game ratio is not as high as people think. It's what he does with the ball that creates the space for other people to score. Had he stayed free from the drugs and the alcohol and the party style of things, and he off the field was a bit more humble, you may have seen better production on the field. But ball at his feet, such a destructive player with ball at feet, running with the ball, and there is no doubt on his skill level, but his goal scoring ratio is a lot less than other players of his era and other comparables. But again, the game has evolved. The impact he had on the game is there for all to see. But look at his goal scoring ratio. It's not as high as people think. It's a lot lower than people realise. He has his highlight reel goals at the World Cup in '86. Obviously, in '82, he was part of the Argentina side that underwhelmed and didn't cope in the '82 World Cup. He obviously didn't go to the '78 World Cup, but you look at him in '86. That's when he's at his peak. Pele, I think Pele, youngest player to score at a World Cup, first player to play at 4 World Cups, I believe, and win 3 of them: 58, 62, 66, and 70. Um, yeah, youngest guy to score at a World Cup, first guy to play at 4 World Cups. Possibly, I think the first guy to get to 1,000 professional goals. His goals to game ratio is almost 1-to-1. Maradona didn't play as many games. I would say Pele. First guy to play at three 3 World Cup finals and 4 World Cups, youngest goal scorer at in World Cup history. I think he's the youngest player to also appear in a World Cup, or one of the youngest players to appear at a World. I think in 1958 he was 17. So, and he scored in the final as well. Yeah, Pele is. But again, the era he was playing in from the late 50s to the 70s is completely different to the era that Maradona appears in, which is in the 70s to the 90s. So they weren't playing at the same time. Oh, his warm up when he's just listening to music and he's prattling around doing keepy up. He wasn't even paying attention. He was just he had his Walkman in, he had his headphones in. He's just mucking around. He's not paying attention to the rest of the Napoli team warming up. He's not paying attention to the coaches. He's just doing his thing. But Maradona was known to do that. Maradona was also known as not one of the best trainers. He was not very good at training. And there's a fair few players who aren't very good at training who just on the pitch turn it on in the blink of an eye. He was known to be lazy in training and a bit of an ego in training. Very difficult trainer, but the coaches knew let him do his thing because he performed on match day, which he generally did. But there was other issues with his time at Napoli, which the documentary about Maradona gets into detail about his issues at Napoli with the drugs and the alcohol and the off-field antics and his private life, which was actually affecting his ability to play. They were basically like, he can't train because he's bollocksed. Basically, would be the same with Gaza. Paul Gascoigne was a difficult trainer because he had so much energy. But there was a famous story about Paul Gascoigne where they're on the training pitch and the ball goes over the fence because a lot of the old training grounds would be right next to housing estates or housing projects. Yeah, his shoes were untied. He was all over the place. It's famous. It's on YouTube. But there was one with Paul Gascoigne where the ball goes over the fence and they're at training and Gascoigne disappears. He goes, "I'll get it, coach," and he doesn't come back for 24 hours. He reappears the next day at the training ground and I've got the ball, coach. He'd literally disappeared for 24 hours, gone on a bender with some of his mates, and then he turned up with the football in his training gear. He hadn't got changed. He was still drunk and he turned back up. So that's a famous story about Paul Gascoigne. Gascoigne and Maradona are very, very similar. In on the field, they could perform brilliantly. Off the field, a lot of issues. And Gascoigne, um, yeah, playing at the same time as Maradona. There was a famous quote, bit of tongue in cheek, where Paul Gascoigne's at Lazio, Maradona's at Valencia. They're playing in a European game, and they're in the tunnel. And Gaza and Maradona look at each other, and Gaza goes, "Oh Christ, I was on the piss last night. I was on the drink last night." And Maradona goes, "Don't worry, so was I." So they were both recovering from heavy party sessions. They go out and they're the best two players on the pitch, and at full time they're seen swapping shirts. Um, there are just some players in a variety of sports who can go out on the old party drugs and on the drink and still turn up on game day. Um, it, you couldn't make this stuff up. You really couldn't make this stuff up because if you did make it up, no one would believe you. But it was so unbelievable it actually happened. It's the stories about Paul Gascoigne and Diego Maradona and George Best, Eusebio as well in the 60s and 70s. He was another player who was known to like drinking and gambling and partying hard. I mean, there was a famous story about George Best where Man United are playing and he's steaming drunk, and I know Maradona was at the '94 World Cup. That's where he failed his drugs test. He did get his visa to play at the '94 World Cup. His goal against Greece. He then didn't get um, into the US after 1994 because of visa issues, because of his off-field antics with drugs and his drugs ban for amphetamines and all that. Before '94, he did get a visa. He did play at the '94 World Cup. That's where he was banned, and that's where his visa was torn up in front of him, and he was thrown out of the US. But George Best, there's a famous story about George Best, and it's at his time at Man United, I believe, in the '70s at this point, and he's absolutely paralytic. He's turned up to the match drunk, and he's playing really badly, but the coach doesn't want to take him off. So at half time, they just pour coffee down his throat. They literally just fill him up with with caffeine, make him throw his guts up. He goes out and scores a hat-trick in the second half. The interviewer for, I believe it was Match of the Day or BBC Radio or something like that, is interviewing him after the game. George Best has no idea what he's talking about because he can't remember what he's done in the game. He doesn't remember scoring a hat-trick. He just nods along and goes with it, going, yeah, cool, great, yeah, scored 3 goals, did I? But that's a famous one of George Best being so drunk he doesn't remember playing a match. That's fact. That is fact. And his teammates were like, "Yeah, we were pouring coffee down his throat to make sure he could perform and play." There's a Reading player of history, played at the same time as George Best, called Robin Friday, also known for his drink and drug exploits. And there's a very famous photo of him. He scored a goal, and he runs up and he kisses the policeman after giving the 2 fingers to the goalkeeper. And he runs up, grabs the police officer, and gives the copper a kiss on the forehead. And it had turned out he'd been arrested the night before for drunk and disorderly, and he'd just been released from cells, literally just before the game. No, there is a famous story about George Best. He's absolutely paralytic. He's turned up to the game. He's completely steamed, still drunk. He's turned up drunk. First half, he's all over the place. At half time, they filled him with coffee. They literally poured 3 litres of coffee down his throat, and he scores a hat-trick in the second half. That became quite commonplace with George Best as his career went on. His drinking was just out of control. Paul Gascoigne, the 1996 England-Scotland game where the dentist chair celebration, there had been a summer training camp in Hong Kong. The players got a bit drunk, and they broke into the dentist's office and started pouring tequila down people's throats, and that was the dentist chair celebration. Paul Gascoigne, Maradona, Eusebio. There are stories about Eusebio from the late 60s and early 70s when he was playing for Benfica, and he was a superstar talent, and it just fell apart for him. There were a lot of players. Tony Adams, when George Graham was still manager of Arsenal, he was regularly play drunk. One of the best English and Arsenal defenders of all time. He was sober when Wenger came along. He found sobriety, but he was playing drunk. Paul Merson, famous for his issues with cocaine, alcohol, and gambling. If you notice Paul Merson's teeth, he's had his teeth done. His teeth all fell out from all his drug abuse. Lee Sharp, former Man United midfielder, gambling problems. Quite a few players. Less likely now. There are still players who have drink and drug problems, but it's a lot different now than what it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. Some of the stories about Maradona and George Best and Paul Gascoigne. There's one, the 91 FA Cup final, or one of the FA Cup finals that Gaza was playing in. I think it was the semi-final. Anyway, they're in the hotel, and curfew's been called, and they can't find Paul Gascoigne and a fellow teammate whose name I forget. I actually forget the teammate's name. They're found playing squash at 4 o'clock in the morning in the hotel gym, and they've disappeared for hours. And they're playing squash, and Gazza's drunk playing squash, and the coach is beside himself. I forget who the Tottenham coach was at the time, and the manager's gone completely bananas. The other player involved is pulled out the starting lineup and is put on the bench and is told you're probably not going to play. Gaza starts the game, has an amazing game, and the rest is history. I mean, he did get sent off, I believe, or injured in that game, but he had an impact on the game. His teammate was kicked out the starting lineup, put on the bench, but they're playing squash at 4 o'clock in the morning. Literally, they're meant to have the wake up morning briefing and breakfast at 9. He hasn't gone to bed yet. He's been out on the piss. He's got bored, and they're playing squash with his teammate. He's got his roommate out of bed and going, right, we're playing squash. Phil Tufnell, a cricketer. There's a funny story about Phil Tufnell, England cricketer from the 90s. They're out on the Ashes tour, I think in 95, 94, 95, down under. And they're in this town in New South Wales, a small rural town in New South Wales. They played a warm-up match against a select cricketing 11. They've been out on the piss all night. They're out on the drink. Phil Tufnell has gone home with the barmaid back to her place. He wakes up at like 5 o'clock in the morning. He realizes, shit, I've got a team meeting at 8. And he goes to the woman who he's had an amorous evening with. How do I get back to town? I've got to get to the hotel by 8 o'clock. She goes, oh, can you borrow my bicycle? So he borrows this woman's bicycle and he's cycling around this town and he's completely lost. And he's still in his England tracksuit from the night before. And a local recognises him as Phil Tufnell and goes, "Oh, you're doing a morning cycle?" He goes, "Yes, I've got a bit lost. I'm looking for the hotel." He literally has not told the local that he's lost, as in he's been out all night. He goes, "Yeah, I'm looking for my hotel." Oh, and the local goes, "Oh, it's just down the road, second right. Good luck in the test series." Oh, thank you. And he gets back to the hotel, and no one is none the wiser that he's been gone for 12 hours back at some barmaid's house 6 miles up the road. He's got away with being out on the piss. He couldn't get away with that now. It's in one of his books as well. It's in one of his books on cricket. But that's a funny story. How he's managed to get himself so drunk he's ended up at the barmaid's place, borrowed her bicycle, got lost, doesn't know where the hotel is, and he's got 2 hours to get back there before morning training starts and the morning briefing, before they get on the bus and then go to Sydney or Brisbane or wherever they were playing the next test match. And he's completely hungover, doesn't have a clue what's going on, and he's all over the place. Um, that's a funny story. Obviously, that was the culture then. The culture now is completely different. In the fact that you just can't get away with things like that. Yes, Tim Payne is in big trouble. That is a historical incident that happened back in 2017. It was fully investigated in 2018. And what I find really interesting is Australia obviously had the ball tampering scandal with Steve Smith. Mark Warner and Bancroft were suspended, and Steve Smith lost the captaincy, and then the coach went, and it all went Pete Tong, and they made Tim Payne captain as a safe pair of hands, for knowing full well about his indiscretion in 2017. Fast forward a couple of years, and we're in the position where they overlook some evidence and bits and pieces, and more things have emerged about what happened in 2017. And it is a sex scandal because he was sexting a female employee of the Tasmanian Cricket Board, which makes up the Cricket Australia, all the state and territory boards make up what is Cricket Australia. And more evidence has come out about what was going on back in 2017, and now cricket has got the Ashes. Is not only is England in chaos with the racism scandal, Australia is now in chaos because they haven't got a captain, and there's question marks again over the governing body in Australia, Cricket Australia, and their handling of a variety of issues going back a couple of years. So both England and Australia going into the Ashes, Cricket Australia and the ECB are under a lot of scrutiny. The playing groups are under scrutiny as well for the culture within the dressing room and what they've been getting up to, and the culture within the sport, the attitudes towards minorities and women. And instead of looking forward to a really exciting five match series, 5 test series, we're going into this on the backdrop of scandal. And the negative headlines could quite easily overshadow what happens on the field down under. It wouldn't surprise me if more allegations break about players while we're out, playing the Ashes this winter, this Christmas, and players get thrown out of squads for both Australia and England. It really wouldn't surprise me if there's more allegations against individual players for misconduct, and they are sent packing and sent home. The whole thing really doesn't. It's not a good look for the sport. This is a sport that's trying to, improve its image, get new fans interested, grow the game, and both England and Australia go into this. I mean, the Australians until last week until yesterday were probably rubbing their hands together, going, "England are on the back foot here. Their domestic game's in crisis. The team's divided, and out of nowhere they've lost yet another captain." And there's question marks over Cricket Australia and that handling of disciplinary issues, much like the ECB with Yorkshire and Essex, with what's going on with cricket over here. Cricket in Australia, same thing. Question marks over the governing body's handling of complaints against players and individuals, their investigations of said complaints, and the culture within the sport in Australia, as well as the culture within the sport here in England. So this Ashes series has been massively overshadowed before a bowl has been batted or bowled. Um, I don't. I haven't fully read into it. Like when it first broke back in 2017, he was being investigated. No one really cared because he wasn't that important to the Australian team. It just was something in the background. Players misbehaved. He's being investigated. He was exonerated in 2018. But following that, what happened with the ball tampering scandal with the Australian South Africa series in Cape Town and the fallout from that, Tim Payne was made captain. Now, Cricket Australia obviously had investigated Tim Payne for his misdeeds or alleged misdeeds back in 2017, 2018, and he was exonerated according to Cricket Australia, and he was allowed to continue. Yeah, he wasn't, and that's the problem. This is the problem with us with the attitudes that the sport has. And cricket's wondering why younger people aren't interested, and why families aren't interested, and why crowd numbers are falling, and why Test cricket's apparently in crisis. It's because of things like this. It's not because of the quality of play that we're seeing. The quality of play is brilliant. I love T20. I love the one-day format. I love Test cricket. Guess what? Putting it behind a paywall and restricting access for fans is shit. That's why people are not interested in actually watching it because they can't access it because we can't afford it. But when you have negative scandals like this, like constant match fixing scandals, players misbehaving. The ball tampering scandal really shocks the Australian sporting side of things, the sporting culture. It went against what Australians are about when it comes to sport. Tim Payne was part of that side that was involved in the ball tampering scandal. He was part of that dressing room. Yeah, he wasn't important, great. He wasn't like, Adam Gilchrist was still like the number one wicket keeper and all that, even though he retired from Test cricket. He was the known wicket keeper. Tim Payne was just a squad guy. He was just there. He was just part of the team. He was an average batsman, a pretty decent wicket keeper. He could keep the scoreboard ticking over, and he was a decent player, but he wasn't overly integral to the Australian side going forward. He was, yeah, investigated for obviously what's happened between him and the Tasmanian cricket official. It made some news in Australia, not big news, but it was in the background. And then this happens, the ball tampering scandal. He's then thrust into the limelight as a safe pair of hands. He's not part of the old leadership group, which was, Smith and Warner and all that. He wasn't a captain or vice captain. He's been made captain because he's seen as not part of the old guard. He's seen as, wasn't part of the leadership group. He's made captain. Cricket Australia are on the back foot. They're dealing with they're handing out these suspensions like they're draconian as anything. The coach resigns, new coach gets brought in. Fast forward a couple of years now, he's gone because of scandal. A scandal that Cricket Australia were fully aware of. It's transpired things. That is also, I think, he was made captain to improve the culture in the dressing room. The irony of that, when he himself has been under investigation for, I wouldn't say he's broken any law. I believe he's married, so obviously morally he's done the wrong thing. But he hasn't necessarily, taken bribes to fix matches. He hasn't done anything to bring the game into disrepute on the playing side of things. But cricket seems to have this so-called moral high ground, which it doesn't have. It doesn't have, right? There is clearly a very toxic culture within cricket, from the very top right down to grassroots. We're seeing it in England. We've seen it in Australia. We've seen it to a certain extent in the IPL with some certain instances happening in locker rooms. The sport as a whole, be it at the domestic level or on tournaments like the IPL or in Test level or whatever it may be, there's obviously a code of conduct. Oh, the whole Rafiq thing. Look, the whole thing is a shambles. Like other players have said that they've suffered abuse and racism and homophobia and other bits and pieces. That's fine. The Rafiq thing, he's not helping himself by his own behaviours. So his anti-Semitic social media posts, allegations being made against him for inappropriate, behaviour towards a member of the public. Now, what that says to me is the Yorkshire County Cricket Club as a whole has a very toxic dressing room and culture where it doesn't matter if you're white, you're black, you're Asian, you're gay, you're straight, you're male, you're female. There is something very wrong within that organisation, and it's all coming out now. It's all coming out now. Like he's saying he was racially bullied. That may have happened. Okay, that may have happened. That did happen because 7 complaints were upheld. But at the same time, he wasn't covering himself in glory either. Now, gambling addiction, that is something that we shouldn't look down on a person for. As I've been talking about players on this stream who had alcohol and drug problems, yet still competed on the field. Addiction is a nasty thing. It's not pleasant. As someone who's gone to meetings and has dealt with you know battling in regards to some of his allegations, a lot of them weren't upheld. So only 7 out of 49 allegations were upheld when he made the complaint. The fact that no one was disciplined is another thing. Other players at other county cricket clubs out at Yorkshire are saying there were things wrong, regardless of our background. And there are 1,000 complaints have been made to the hotline. So there is clearly a culture problem within cricket. Rafiq is not helping his case by some of the things that are coming out about him and his actions. Gambling addiction is not very nice. Any kind of addiction is a problem. We shouldn't blame the addict. We should support and educate the addict. That's my opinion. Oh, look, a person's religious background or cultural background, addiction still happens. It doesn't matter. I know some die-hard Christians who gamble and drink. I know some very religiously, practicing people of Judaism who, break kosher and do things they shouldn't. Pulyara, that's easy. Pulyara is an easy name to say. Pulyara. I mean that is they wouldn't say his name. That's ridiculous. Like I work with a lot of Nepalese, and they all have nicknames that they tell us this is what I like my nickname to be, and they are some of the hardest working people I've ever come across, and some of them are really really funny as well. They'd say, "Oh, just call me this. This is my nickname." I've anglicised my nickname. I think the culture within Yorkshire Cricket Club and the culture within cricket in general, there is a drink culture. There is this lack of touch with reality within the dressing rooms. Now, the cricket club near me is a multi-background cricket club, as in you've got everyone from almost every social background, from the working class lad who works on the bins all the way up to like investment bankers. So it's cross strata society. I think the issue is within the professional game, regardless of Rafiq and what his allegations are, because 7 of them were upheld. We have argued about this. We have a difference of opinion. He himself has also been highlighted for, racial slurs towards another community. And everyone goes, "Oh, the whites have got to be racist." I don't think a lot of people have been out in London, for example, around Aldgate when you've got black gangs and Asian gangs fighting each other. Racism goes, "Oh, it doesn't matter the colour of your skin or your ethnic background. It's there." Will I be watching sport? I'll be watching a bit of the rugby union. There's a couple of rugby union test matches I'll be watching today. They're not the big top end nations. They're some of the smaller nations playing, but I like watching them play. And I might do a couple of match reviews on them. Simply because they're tier 2 and tier 3 nations. I like watching the slightly lower level of rugby because it's good to see some new players. Some of these players are actually pretty good. And smaller nations doing well and competing and playing and showcasing their skills. There's a lot of spiders in my flat. I've got to tidy my flat. So I will be watching a couple of I will be watching a few bits and pieces. Yeah, I mean the Rafiq situation. He hasn't helped himself. But then people are now going through his social media accounts, trying to like now incriminate him and things. Like that doesn't take away from what he complained about. At the same time, he hasn't held himself up in the highest regard himself with some of his actions away from the game towards people. The KHL, it's a different style. There's no unified ice surface. Some of the KHL teams have NHL ice surface. Some have the IIHF ice surface, which is a slightly different size. It's a different style of hockey. It's completely different to the NHL. I've watched a few KHL games. It's a different style. It's more skill based. It's a slightly slower paced game. I prefer watching like the Swiss league or the German league or the Scandinavian leagues, the British leagues over the KHL because it's a bit more physical. There's a bit more gnarliness about it. It's all different styles. There is no one particular style. The NHL for me is still the top level that every player wants to aspire to get to, and if they only play um, one game, I don't know who Australia select now as their captain. That's up for the Cricket Australia to figure out. I don't know if Tim Payne remains as wicketkeeper. I haven't really been following the Australian Test side since Steve Smith, Bancroft, and Warner were suspended for their role in the ball tampering scandal. What I will say is this: it does raise questions about Cricket Australia and their complaints process and their investigative process when players misbehave, and it still raises questions about the culture within that dressing room because he was made captain to change the culture and to be a safe pair of hands to get them through a difficult period. They also said to Steve Smith he may become captain again. It's like with Joe Root. I don't think Joe Root's the right guy to be England captain. He's part of the Yorkshire setup that's under so much scrutiny right now. He's claiming he didn't see anything and hear anything, which is a load of BS in my opinion. Because if you're a club captain or a national captain, you are a conduit to the coaching setup. Um, that's a possibility he could become captain, but again, you've got to be a hardcore cricket fan and look at what's happening. I do reckon Steve Smith has learned his lessons about the win at all cost mentality. And when you've got former captains like Steve Clarke and Adam Gilchrist going, we are shocked about the culture within that dressing room and how and where the direction that the team was taking with the Cricket Australia and the structures from the top to bottom, and raising concerns about the direction the sport was taking with governance and coaching and selectors and I wouldn't say well I would say he's the ECB's yes guy. To be honest, I'm not so sure Joe Root is being fully transparent and honest. I think he's been very. I think the England Test team. Yeah, but I don't think he wouldn't hurt a fly because he might not want to have confrontation. He doesn't seem like a confrontational guy. That's a difference. I think he's been told and instructed to say things in press conferences to avoid further problems. Bear in mind, a lot of these players are PR coached when it comes to media press conferences, and they don't fully say what they want to say. They hold back from basically saying what they want to say. They get fined when they speak out of turn. Players, we don't have players now just going, sod it, this is how I feel. This is because they will get fined from the ICC, the ECB. They get bringing the game into disrepute. Well, actually, I have an issue within the game. I want to air it. It's like when Charlie Austin, when he was playing for Southampton, was complaining about VAR. He was right to actually blow up like that. Because for so long we've seen these boring, like, yeah, we played well, opposition were tough. Oh, we didn't play well today. We didn't take our chances. It's boring. It's the same. It's your generic press conference or interview. I like to see players going, "Fuck it, I've had enough. This is how I feel. We played like shit." But you can't do it because you get fined. You get fined for speaking your mind. You get fined for showing too much emotion or if you criticise something. So when Charlie Austin came out and blew up in that Premier League press conference, it was the aftermath of a game where I think it was a 1-1 or something. I think West Brom Southampton. It was a draw. Both sides were frustrated. And he came out. He got a he got a week's wages basically fined because he criticised the situation in regards to VAR and whether they're going to implement it. The referee made some mistakes. They're glaring. They're obvious. We need the system in place. Stop debating about it and get on with it. His captaincy winning percentage is terrible. He just comes across as a nice guy who just does what he's told. He really is a yes guy. His press conferences are so monotone and lacking in emotion. He's been coached to basically deal with the press. They have Wayne Bennett. Wayne Bennett just hates the press. He's always been that way. Long before PR coaches and media coaches came in to tell people how to deal with interviews, Wayne Bennett has always been anti-media. He always is. He doesn't give anything away. It's been like that for 30 odd years. Other players, a lot of coaches now are like, "We'll copy the Wayne Bennett idea. He doesn't give much away." But when they blow up, like Ivan Cleary had a ding dong with the media. He got fined. he got fined. The Roosters coach got fined for his outburst about refereeing. He got fined. Occasionally they blow up, and when they blow up, Trent Robinson, that's it, the Roosters coach. There was an instant, obviously, where the Latrell Mitchell Joseph Manu incident. He went on a 10-15 minute explosion. He had had enough, and he got fined. He got fined, and I think there's got to come a point where you go in. Hang on a second. I love Ricky. I love Sticky. He wears his heart on his sleeve, and he's actually come out and said, "I'm not going to say anything because I'm going to get fined." He's like, "I'm going to get fined if I actually say what I want to say." Um, you know, Ricky Stewart as a coach, as a player, he was a live wire. As a coach, he's a live wire. He's a very passionate guy. He rarely tones it down in press conferences. But this season, he did. There was one press conference where he goes, "I'm not going to say what I was going to say because I'm going to get fined. I want to say things, but I'm going to get fined, and I'm just don't have the energy to deal with the NRL integrity unit and get fined again. Not going to do it. I'm just going to say, yeah, we lost the game, but I'm not. I remember watching it. It was like we lost the game, fine. We don't. I'm not going to say the referees cost us the game. We weren't good enough, but what I'm going to say, I can't say I'll get fined. He pretty much said, I'm not really going to give a press conference. I'm frustrated. I'm going to deal with my team, work with the players. I'm not going to say stuff. It's just going to get me, another fine. I've had a few of them. I'll add it to the collection. I'll save it for a following week. And his press conferences this year were a little bit more subdued than in previous years. But he has blown up before. And rightly so. I think he is allowed to air his frustrations, even when the team are winning. Um, so there is that. Footballing coach, I mean, Kevin Keegan, I think once he blew up. Roy Hodgson blew up once, where he basically said to the reporter, "You're asking stupid questions. Don't be an art." He basically said that. He swore. Stuart Pearce got a fine a couple of times. He got fined a few times. There's been a few football managers who've not held back. Mourinho is another one. How he doesn't get more fines for some of his antics. But I find press conferences now really dull. Like there's no one. I mean, John Tortorella in the NHL. How many fines has he got for basically being John Tortorella? Like, love him or hate him, his interviews are colourful. They're fun. I find them funny because guess what? He's human. He's showing his human emotions. He's not being, the droid that the league wants these guys to be. They want them to follow a certain line and stick within a certain remit, and it's boring. But when a coach or a player comes out with a controversial post-match or pre-match press conference, it actually creates more interest and more eyes will go on that sport because you'll see it on social media, you'll see it in the mainstream media, and people go, "I actually want to watch this now," and it's different. Um, but too many players are too cautious with it. They're so boring and coached. They are PR coached. Honestly, I do believe Joe Root does know a lot more about the Yorkshire situation than he's letting on, but he's been told and instructed to do so, A, to avoid any legal entanglements, and B, to just dampen the fires on the scandal. Just say this. This is what you got to say. Say it. That's my opinion. From watching all these press conferences from coaches and players, they're so monotone, they're so one-dimensional. It's just regurgitate the same stuff, change a few words, change a few names, blah. But when you get a coach or a player blow up in such public fashion, it is not only hilarious because we haven't seen it for ages, it's really entertaining. I actually prefer seeing characters like that within sport because I think we're lacking it a hell of a lot right now. Kohli steps down as T. That defeat against Pakistan, um, and whether that means that eventually he might step down from all forms of international cricket and just focus on the IPL and the T20 tournaments. I don't think he's going to retire from T20s. I think he's going to retire from international cricket at some point. Uh, Virat Kohli is one of those players who is a controversial player. He has had controversy in his press conferences and his antics on the field. He has been fined a lot. He has been suspended before. But I like that in players. They're the controversial players. I actually like them. They bring some spice to the competition. They bring some spice to the to the international scene or the club scene. And it makes it more interesting because when players are not I think he will. I think he will. I think if he's gonna wind it down, I think he will. He can make more money playing T20 IPL um, than Test cricket for his match fee. He can make more money, and I do think India need a reset. What the government has been doing with the past years with their mind control. Oh, look, there is someone, sport and social media. I think, yeah, there's a video I need to do on that, the relationship um, between sport and social media. I do believe it's a toxic one, and it doesn't necessarily benefit sport. I think when athletes and teams first started using Twitter and Facebook and YouTube to communicate with their fans, it was brilliant. It was like, okay, this is what social media is about. It's positive. They're communicating with their fans. They're reaching out to a wider audience. That's great. What we're seeing though is they're now being coached about their social media use, and I honestly believe that individual players should just get rid of their social media accounts and let the team have a social media account because, as we've seen with Rafiq and his social media has been brought up about some of his statements he may have made that are of a less than polite nature towards the Jewish community. Um, we've seen obviously Tim Payne with the sexting scandal. Players' private lives should remain private. We TikTok obviously last year with Nathan Cleary getting his suspension from his TikTok antics. You know, Carl Walker posting on his Instagram, "I'm partying with prostitutes with cocaine." Well done, Moses Keane having his house party during lockdown. Like, yeah, I honestly believe sport and social media, it's a fine balance of a relationship. Um, and I don't think the balance is right. I think. Oh, by the way, I love my new clipper with its collectible case. I really do. I'm actually really, and it comes with an instruction manual how to use a lighter. Don't burn yourself, and it'll become useful when that light is gone, long gone. Uh, yeah, they're social media. It's like mainstream media coaching when you're giving press conferences. They're coaching players now in their social media use. Um, and the algorithms as well. There's sponsorships and all sorts. And I've discussed the YouTube situation with how they're changing the format of how you when you see videos, the dislike button, the numbers have disappeared. Um, and yeah, Ben Stokes will play in the Ashes. I think yes, Ben Stokes is one of those players who's very controversial. In interviews, he comes across as really boring, but off the field, he's very controversial. There's been domestic violence allegations against him, homophobic allegations against him, racist, anti-disability, drunken violence. He's been to court. He's one of those players who you've got to wonder, will he one more incident? How will he survive it? And then people go, oh, but he was found not innocent of a fray. Yeah, because if he'd been charged with GBH or ABH, he's going to prison. A fray is very difficult to prove in a court of law. That's where the CPS got it wrong. Alex Hales has been dragged into this scandal involving culture within cricket. Alex Hales is a bit of a bell end, to be honest. His off-field antics, and he's not very popular in the dressing room. He's not a very popular guy within the cricketing community. Let's not pretend he is. Uh, Obviously, his club are like and needs to be like, we're supporting Alex Hales with his difficulties. No, he's generally an arsehole. He's in a privileged position and he's abusing it. Being a professional athlete is a very privileged position, and a lot of them forget that it's a privilege, not a right. Um, and Tim Payne is finding that out right now. Yeah, but Alex Hales, I mean, that's the worst two-pack impersonation I've ever seen. That is the worst fancy dress costume I've ever seen. Anyone ever wear. Like, ugh. If I'm going to do fancy dress, I'm going to do something like with the sideburns and be long hair, I'm going to probably wear a Holland or an Argentina jersey from the 70s and just rock up, or a George Best top. Um, Justin Trudeau, he's a bit of a tit and all. He's not as popular in Canada as you realise. A lot of Canadians do not like him. Prince Harry, he's a melt. Yeah, Prince Harry's a bit of a he's not the most intelligent. Well, I don't know what else you can, but I think yeah, there's a lot of stories coming out about high profile people in the sports world. And Prince Harry is actually, he's the ambassador for rugby league. He does a lot for rugby league and rugby union. Same with Prince William. They're very involved in sports, have ambassadorial roles. Fair play to them. Princess Anne as well with the Scottish Rugby Union is president of the Scottish Rugby Union and does a lot. And she's a former Olympian. So a lot of the royal family have been involved in sport in an administrative role and in a ceremonial role, and rightly so. They've done a lot of good things. But Prince Harry, yeah, wasn't a good look when he was at that fancy dress party. I think, yeah, it's. I've been to some fancy dress parties where some people have come with some rather iffy costumes that I'm not overly keen on. Well, Rafik isn't helping himself, and if he is found guilty of inappropriate contact with a person under the age of 16, then that's different. Sleepy Biden, but will you just shut up, dude? Will you shut up, man? I can't do a very good Biden impersonation. He's one of the few presidents that I can't do an impersonation of. Trump, Trump, hey, we're gonna win. We're gonna get so tired of winning. Yeah, Trump. I can do a very good Nixon as well, which is generally terrifying. I don't want to do my Nixon, but I'm not a crook. I'm just practicing my own form of deregulation, Mr. President. I'm not going to do. I'm not. I'm not. I'm not. Piers Morgan's just an absolute grade A bellend, really. Um, China, China, um, China, Rocket Man. Yeah, I do miss the Trump gap. I mean, Trump is just a toxic human being. Um, Biden is just there as a safe pair of hands. He was the safe option to vote for. Is what it is. But the political system in America, I think, is a discussion for the other channel. I know we're getting on to to China, China. Oh my God, no, I just don't have the money. A friend of mine is going, mate Sam is going, so he'll be there. Uh, Safe pair of hands. Literally, that's what he's been described as. Is just he's there because he's got experience, but he's not overly talented, but he's not overly useless. He's just there. I don't think he will run for re-election. If he does, it'll be painful. That fact's gone out. China, um, Rocket Man, China. Um, I love the poorly educated. Um, just China, China. I'm gonna keep doing my Trump now. I could do my Boris Johnson. Yes, very nice. Blah, blah, yes, doing his business. And Boris Johnson. I've done my Boris Johnson. It's just mumble a lot, and yeah. I'd rather not talk politics on this channel. I've got the other channel for that. China. And I did have. I remember a couple of years ago. Um, an American video guys watched my views on Trump, and an hour and a half later, I'd calmed down about China, Donald Trump, and we're going to win. Um, uh, do I play FPL? FPL, FPL, FPL. I have no idea what FPL is. Um, uh, Yeah, I have another channel, The History Boffin, where I discuss like politics and film and media and social issues and book reviews and film reviews and stuff. I don't no, I don't play the fantasy leagues. I don't play fantasy football. I don't play any of that kind of stuff. Favorite sports games. I got bored of them a long time ago. I think some of the early FIFAs were quite good. NHL 2005 is my favourite sports game. I've played some of the touring car games. I've had a couple of F1 games in the past. Um, but I'm not really a massive fan of sports video games. In all honesty, it's never something that, as a teenager and adult, I've really enjoyed. I stopped playing them when I was a lot younger. The older I've got, I prefer more first and third person shooter and adventure games where you go open world exploring and stuff like that. But video game, I haven't really played the video games for over a year and a half. I haven't played on the Xbox for over a year and a half. So um, yeah, I've completely tuned out of video gaming as of right now. Well, I remember the days of WWF SmackDown. I'm that old. I'm old enough. I'm in my early 30s now. I remember the WWF uh, SmackDown versus Raw. I had a few wrestling games on the Xbox 360, um, but I haven't really my video gaming again. I haven't really. There's nothing out that I enjoy right now. Like I've I've sort of fallen out of love with gaming. Not because I've got older. It's just there's not a lot I really enjoy right now that's on release. A lot of the games I played, I enjoyed then, and I still enjoy now. But I haven't plugged the Xbox in. I haven't got the latest Xbox or PlayStation because I can't justify spending the amount of money um, there is. Although esports is something that's very very interesting, and how real professional sport right now is and esports are linking up together and the growth of esports. It's a video I've been meaning to do for a while on esports. You know, it's a very interesting topic. It's very interesting in direction it's taking. So esports and the amount of revenue it generates, and the fact that there's professional e-gamers, like professional gamers, are making a lot of money in esports tournaments, and we're talking like people who are like 16, 17 years old being millionaires. Like it's ridiculous. Like so, that's an avenue that I could look at into discussing esports and discussing the growth of esports in the last 5 years and the funding and sponsorships and various bits and pieces about esports. But again, gaming is something that I've tuned out on. Will I get back into it? Quite possibly in the new year. Plug the Xbox in the TV and get all the updates sorted and have a little go. But there's nothing out right now that I want to play. There's nothing that's really interesting me right now in the video game world. I've tuned out completely with Battlefield and Call of Duty. I'm not interested in them. I'm not interested. I've got GTA 5. I got bored of years ago, and while it would be nice to have GTA 6, they haven't given us even a close to being. Well, yeah, the fact that GTA 5 has been on now 3 console generations is ridiculous. Red Dead 2 is one of my favourite games. I do enjoy it. I started playing it again before I moved here, and then in August last year, I moved and I never plugged the Xbox and TV back in. Um, will I want to do that? Yeah, I might tidy up over there and get the TV and the Xbox plugged back in and have a little go on it. But so many updates to do for the Xbox. Yeah, I mean, they are, well, the microtransactions put me off. The online was almost unplayable. I tried the online, found it unenjoyable to hell. Um, that's the only reason why it's continuing with, it's been out now for 8 years. 8 years. That is ridiculous. I know they've admitted they fouled up with the revamped PS2 generation of like GTA 3, Vice City, and San Andreas, and they go, yeah, we'll just do them. We're sorry. We'll leave it on PC as it was. We're sorry for screwing up the revamp. Like, don't get me wrong. I do love video games. There's nothing out right now that interests me. I'm waiting for Gears of War, the next Gears of War in the series, because I obviously finished the last one. I got the collector's edition, so I'm looking forward to that when it comes out. Um, but again, there's nothing really that is interesting me right now. Nothing at all. There is nothing right now that is getting me interested to plug that back in, um, and start playing again. Because all the games I've got, I've played to death. I'm bored of them. Um, and again, that's something we can discuss on the other channels when the next GTA is coming out. The this time next year at the earliest is what they're saying. FIFA, there's only so far you can go with a sports game with a standard controller. There's only so far you can go. There's only so far they can take the gameplay experience. Just all they've done with FIFA over the years is improve the graphics. Again, the online microtransactions to hell. So there's only so far you can. I mean, that's why I stopped playing the NHL game. That's why I stopped playing the NFL games. There's only so far you can take the gameplay before it's just generic and all you're doing is updating the graphics. Um, and even then, once you've reached that point of you can't take it any further, is it's not even enjoyable. And the amount of money they're making us, they're charging us for these incomplete games, by the way, with add-ons which you've got to pay for, which is just one of the reasons why I didn't enjoy the last couple of Call of Duties. Is like it's just microtransactions constantly. I don't bother with Twitch. The AI's. I mean, don't get me wrong. I did enjoy some of the earlier FIFAs on PS2 and PS3, but it got to a point. No, there hasn't been. And again, Brian, like, I mean, some of the older games were really, really good. But again, there's not one for rugby union. There's not one. There's a couple for rugby league, but they're mainly aimed for the Australian market with the NRL. So that's hurting the growth of that sport because if you get kids interested in playing on the console, they might want to watch the games in real life. It does have an impact. Um, there was a couple of rugby union games. I had the last one in 2007. It was 2007. I played it. It was all right. It was good. It was better than earlier EA Sports versions. It was good, but at the same time, it had limitations. Which, if they were to release it now, it would be brilliant. Unfortunately, EA and 2K have gone. We don't really want to do rugby games, which I think has also hurt the 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 sport in the real world. If you're not getting young people interested in playing on the games console, they may not be interested in watching in real life. So you actually lose out on that sports market. You actually lose out on these young people going, well, they're not really gearing this this sport to work. Well, if you market a game correctly and you put the right developer into it, you can. FIFA is it's just a generic thing where it goes up in price every year, but the quality declines. FIFA is not been fun to play for a very, very long time. Yet people keep buying it. It will become a point where it's market saturation, and they're like, we're done. There's only so far you can take sports games on console and PC. There really is only so far you can take it before it. The only sports games I really liked were the Fitty Managers on the computer. Um, they were kind of fun and addictive. You could lose yourself in Football Manager for days. Um, and I used to love Football Manager. But again, like there's only again so far you can take a video game before you really have to come up with something completely different. And when it comes to sports video games, yeah, like obviously the IRB World Rugby stopped selling the rights to EA for them to do the game, which I think cost the World Rugby a lot of money. Rugby League, again, they've got to sell the image rights. And yeah, there's going to come a point where the players, bearing in mind, this is where in other sports like the NHL NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball players have gone on lockouts and strikes because they're not getting when their posters are sold, trading cards, anything with their image, they're not making enough money, and this is where some of these um, big deals, the players want money. The players want money for their image rights, which FIFA does not control. That is the players. Um, and Pro Evo Soccer, they've already had to go, we'll link up with one particular club. They want to avoid paying out the image rights. They want to make as much money as possible while not sharing the wealth with those whose image they're using. And Pro Evo has had that for years. Pro Evo has had that for donkey's years. Um, I think Pro Evo is actually the better game to play, but that's another debate for another day. But when it comes to image rights, players like the NHL, that's where, 3 lockouts and a player strike. Major League Baseball, you know, there is player unrest when it comes to their image rights being used, and how much of the revenue earned from selling the product with them on the video game cover or them on the trading cards or posters, how much of the revenue actually comes back to the players or goes to the league. And that's where collective bargaining agreements and revenue sharing comes from. Because when you are selling a product like NHL 2022, which is what this NHL would be, NHL 22, or FIFA, 22, the players want their image rights and want to get paid. And that is a problem. And the players, while football's got stupid amounts of money, other leagues and sports don't. Will Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland ever get a Super League team? Wales have tried with the Welsh Crusaders. They currently play in the Super League system. Rugby league in Scotland's a mess, and in Ireland doesn't even exist. It's not even thought of. If we're talking about rugby league in this country, it's a shambles. No, it really is. There is no way to describe it. Rugby league in the UK is a mess. The RFL is a mess. The Super League is a mess. The TV deal is absolutely atrocious. Yeah, there's always going to be problems with match fees, image rights, and the fact there's no salary cap either in European football or in global football as a rule. Only certain leagues have salary caps. That again, wealth distribution. Who gets what? Does it go to FIFA? Does it go to? So FIFA make a lot of money out of EA Sports and all that, and so do UEFA. And the other federations as well. They make a lot of their revenue through the video game sales because that's their image, that's their logo, that's their copyright. And EA and Pro Evo have been very, very cheeky in how they do it. They sign up with one club football team for their rights. Only one team has all the full players for their rights. So those individual players get money. So it is very, very difficult for the image rights and the naming rights and stuff. And other sports have found this out the hard way. The players go, well, we want our fair share of the revenue because we're the reason why you have this video game or this media product that your name is put to. Give us a share of the revenues of it, please. So the fact that the FA and England players, same with the RFU and match fees, World Rugby and match fees for test matches, which I'll be watching one right now because there's one about to start. So it is interesting. And yeah, this debate is not going to go away. So image rights for players, that's caused a lot of problems in the past for professional sport and will continue to do so. Will continue to do so. I remember the Athens 2004 video game, there was a lot of debate over the image rights and what the IOC got and what the individual athletes got. And that never got fully resolved, I don't think. Super League signed with Sky, right? They haven't signed with ESPN or BT Sport. They'll probably even get less market share than they already do. And BT Sport's hemorrhaging money and has lost a lot of rights to a lot of leagues and a lot of competitions. So I can't see BT Sport being the future of Super League's direction. ESPN, that's part of the BT Sport kind of bandwidth. ESPN in the US is owned by someone else. That would be interesting if they get on ESPN and get exposure overseas. Be very important. Anyway, I'm going to call it a stream there. Thank you very much for all your questions. A lot of things we've discussed. I will have some more videos for you very, very soon. So keep your eye out and have a good afternoon.